Hey, you know what time it is? Oh, hello. We'll try one more time. Bow! You know what time it is? Get into it! Get into it! Yes! We are back, lovelies. We are back with Storytime with Chris. Hello, hello, hello. You know, as you can see, I'm wearing my white hair turban with my green crop top hoodie and my green sweatpants. And I was thinking about it today. Anybody that knows me really well knows that I'm a huge fan of Power Rangers. Also Super Sentai, which is where Power Rangers comes from. Which, fun fact, Super Sentai was created by a man named Shotaro Ishinomori, who is a very well-known anime creator and manga writer. And he was the person who created the genre known as Super Sentai, which Sentai is another way of saying warrior, so superhuman warrior. So that's where Power Rangers comes from. Power Rangers came out in 1993 and made its own American version of that, which is there are similarities and differences between Super Sentai and Power Rangers. I love both, but I grew up mostly with Power Rangers. It wasn't until I became an adult that I was fully introduced to Super Sentai. Both of them are amazing, I'm just saying. And I say all that because I wear green and white for Jason David Frank, who unfortunately passed away. It was rather unfortunate, and it was very heartbreaking for me. He was one of my favorite Power Rangers, but not the. That place goes to Austere John, aka Jason the Red Ranger, the original Mighty Morphin Red Ranger. But I wear the green and white as an homage to Tommy as the Green Ranger with the Dragon Zord, and the white for him as the White Ranger with the White Tiger Zord and White Falcon Zord. Rest in peace, Jason David Frank. We love you and we miss you. And also, it's a really good day today because it's 6 days before my birthday. I will be 32 next Monday. I'm so excited. I'm looking forward to it. I'm excited to ring in a new chapter in my life. A new chapter where I get to... since we're here, y'all, I don't care how old you get, always celebrate your birthday. Your birthday is a national holiday for you. Go and celebrate your birthday every year. Every year that you are still alive is a highlight. Every year that you are still around for your friends is a highlight. Every year that you continue to grow and to mature, every year that you get to learn something new throughout the entire year, that is something to celebrate. So I always look forward to my birthday. I don't care how old I get. I will be 32. I love the fact that I'm in my 30s. It's amazing. I'm still as young and lively as I was in my 20s, and just as much as I was when I was a teenager. Just somebody last week thought I was 17 or just turned 18. And I was like, no, I'm in my 30s and I love it. One, I take really good care of myself, and black don't crack, okay? We take our genes allow us to age a lot slower. Scientific fact. But I do a really good job of taking care of myself. I drink plenty of water every day. Drink herbal tea a lot. Not really into a whole lot of black or green tea in my life because they hold a lot of caffeine. I don't necessarily need that. I cook pretty frequently. I exercise. I do yoga in my spare time. I perform story time. So my life is quite rich. My quite rich life is quite. There we go. But you didn't come to hear me blather. Came to hear a story. So, last time we were here, the Baudelaire orphans have been introduced to two new friends at Proof Rock Preparatory School. We'll just call it Proof Rock Prep, to be short. Duncan and Isadora Quagmire, the Quagmire triplets. Now, yes, you heard me right. They are the Quagmire triplets because their oldest brother, Quigley Quagmire, unfortunately passed away in a fire that also killed their parents. So they have a lot of similarities with the Baudelaire orphans, considering that their parents were killed in a very terrible fire and destroyed their home. So, yeah, we're gonna see how this friendship unfolds. and they are very important to the story, so please pay very close attention to Isadora and Duncan Quagmire. Chapter 4. If you have walked into a museum recently, whether you did so to attend an art exhibition or to escape from the police, you may have noticed a type of painting known as a triptych. A triptych has 3 panels, with something different painted on each of the panels. For instance, my friend Professor Reed made a triptych for me, and he painted fire on one panel, a typewriter on another, and the face of a beautiful, intelligent woman on the third. The triptych is entitled What Happened to Beatrice, and I cannot look upon it without weeping. I am a writer, and not a painter, and if I were to try and paint a triptych entitled The Baudelaire Orphan's Miserable Experiences at Prufrock Prep, I would paint Mr. Remora on one panel, Mrs. Bass on another, and a box of staples on the third, and the results would make me so sad that between the Beatrice triptych and the Baudelaire triptych, I would scarcely stop weeping all day. Mr. Remora was Violet's teacher, and he was so terrible that Violet thought she'd almost rather stay in the orphan shack all morning and eat her meals with her hands tied behind her back rather than hurry to room 1 and learn from such a wretched man. Mr. Remora had a dark, thick mustache as if somebody had chopped off a gorilla's thumb and stuck it above Mr. Remora's lip. And also, like a gorilla, Mr. Remora was constantly eating bananas. Bananas are a fairly delicious fruit and contain a healthy amount of potassium. But after watching Mr. Remora shove banana after banana into his mouth, dropping banana peels on the floor and spearing banana pulp on his chin and in his mustache, Violet never wanted to see another banana again. So if you look closely, there's the triptych that the author was referring to. There's Mr. Remora, and then the staples, and then I think that's, I just lost her name so fast. Mrs. Bass, excuse me. In between bites of banana, Mr. Remora would tell stories, and the children would write the stories down in notebooks, and every so often there would be a test. The stories were very short, and there were a whole lot of them on every conceivable subject. One day I went to the store to purchase a carton of milk, Mr. Remora would say, chewing on a banana. When I got home, I poured the milk into a glass and drank it. Then I watched television. The end. Or, one afternoon, a man named Edward got into a green truck and drove to a farm. The farm had geese and cows. The end. Mr. Remora would tell story after story and eat banana after banana, and it would get more and more difficult for Violet to pay attention. To make things better, Duncan sat next to Violet, and they would pass notes to one another on particularly boring days. But to make things worse, Carmelita Spatz sat right behind Violet, and every few minutes she would lean forward and poke Violet with a stick she found on the lawn. "Orphan!" she would whisper and poke Violet with the stick, and Violet would lose her concentration and forget to write down some detail of Mr. Remora's story. Let's pause here for a second. First of all, for any student that is a foster child or an orphan, I'm going to just say this to you right now. You are loved. You deserve good and positive things. And nobody is allowed to put their hands on you or to disrespect you. Do you understand me? You are here for a reason. And life may not be fair for whatever the reason may have brought you to this point, but let me tell you something. I love you. I wish positive things for you. I wish brilliant things for you. And you're going to be great wherever life may take you. Because home and family is not whose blood you have. It's the place where you're most happy, where you feel the most safe, where you feel the most seen and loved. That's all. Let's get back to the story. Across the hall in room 2 was Klaus's teacher, Mrs. Bass, whose black hair was so long and messy that she was also vaguely resembling a gorilla. Mrs. Bass was a poor teacher, a phrase which here does not mean a teacher who doesn't have a lot of money, but a teacher who is obsessed with the metric system. The metric system, you probably know, is a system by which the majority of the world measures things. Just as it is perfectly alright to eat a banana or two, it is perfectly alright to be interested in measuring things. Klaus could remember a time when he was about 8 years old when he had measured the width of all the doorways in the Baudelaire mansion when he was bored one rainy afternoon. But rain or shine, all Mrs. Bass wanted to do was measure things and write down the measurements on the chalkboard. Each morning she would walk into room 2 carrying a bag full of ordinary objects, a frying pan, a picture frame, the skeleton of a cat, and place an object on each student's desk. Measure! Mrs. Bass would shout, and everybody would take out their rulers and measure whatever it was that their teacher had put on their desk. They would call out the measurements to Mrs. Bass. She would write them on the board and then have everybody switch objects. The class would continue on in this way for the entire morning, and Klaus would feel his eyes glaze over. The phrase glaze over here means ache slightly out of boredom. Across the room, Isadora Quagmire's eyes were glazing over too, and occasionally the two of them would look at one another and stick their tongues out as if to say, Mrs. Bass is terribly boring, isn't she? But Sunny, instead of going into a classroom, had to work in the administrative building, and I must say that her situation was perhaps the worst in the entire triptych. As Vice Principal Nero's secretary, Sunny had numerous duties assigned to her that were simply impossible for a baby to perform. For instance, she was in charge of answering the phone, but people who called Vice Principal Nero did not always know that Saletepia was Sunny's way of saying, "Good morning, this is Vice Principal Nero's office. How may I help you?" By the second day, Nero was furious at her for confusing so many of his business associates. In addition, Sunny was in charge of typing, stapling, and mailing all of Vice Principal Nero's letters, which meant she had to work a typewriter, a stapler, and stamps, all of which were designed for adult use. Unlike many babies, Sunny had some experience in hard work. After all, she and her siblings had worked for some time at the Lucky Smells lumber mill, but this equipment was simply inappropriate for such tiny fingers. Sunny could scarcely move the typewriter's keys, and even when she did not know how to spell most of the words Nero dictated, she never used a stapler before, so she sometimes stapled her fingers by mistake, which hurt quite a bit. And I know that from personal experience growing up. I've accidentally stuck myself with a stapler, and it does hurt. And occasionally one of the stamps would stick to her tongue and wouldn't come off. In most schools, no matter how miserable, the students have a chance to recuperate during the weekend, when they can rest and play instead of attending wretched classes. And the Baudelaire orphans look forward to taking a break from looking at bananas, rulers, and secretarial supplies, so they were quite distressed one Friday when the Quagmires informed them that Proof Rock Prep did not have weekends. Saturday and Sunday were regular school days, supposedly in keeping with the school's motto. This rule did not really make any sense. It is, after all, just as easy to remember that you will die when you're relaxing as when you are in school. But that was the way things were, so the Baudelaires could never remember exactly what day it was, so repetitive was their schedule. So I am sorry to say that I cannot tell you what day it was when Sunny noticed that the staple supply was running low. But I can tell you that Nero informed her that because she had wasted so much time learning to be a secretary, he would not buy any more when they ran out. Instead, Sunny would have to make staples herself, out of some skinny metal rods Nero kept in a drawer. "That's ridiculous," Violet cried when Sunny told her of Nero's latest demand. It was after dinner, and the Baudelaire orphans were in the orphan shack with the Quagmire triplets, sprinkling salt at the ceiling. Violet had found some pieces of metal behind the cafeteria and had fashioned 5 pairs of noisy shoes, 3 for the Baudelaires and 2 for the Quagmire, so the crabs wouldn't bother them when they visited the orphan shack. The problem of the tan fungus, however, was yet to be solved. With Duncan's help, Klaus had found a book on fungus in the library and read that salt might take this particular fungus shrivel up. The Quagmires had distracted some of the masked cafeteria workers by dropping their trays on the ground, and while Nero yelled at them for making a mess, the Baudelaires had slipped 3 salt shakers into their pockets. Now, in the brief recess after dinner, the 5 children were sitting on bales of hay, trying to toss salt onto the fungus and talking about their day. "It certainly is ridiculous," Klaus agreed. "It's silly enough that Sunny has to be a secretary, but making her own staples? I've never heard of anything so unfair." "I think staples are made in factories," Duncan said, pausing to flip through his green notebook to see if he had any notes on the matter. "I don't think people have made staples by hand since the 15th century. "If you could stitch some of the skinny metal rods, Sunny," Isadora said, "we could all help make the staples after dinner time. If 5 of us worked together, it would be much less trouble." And speaking of trouble, I'm working on a poem about Count Olaf, but I'm not sure I know words that are terrible enough to describe him. "I imagine it's difficult to find words that rhyme with Olaf," Violet said. "It is difficult," Isadora admitted. "All I can think of so far is pilaf, which is a kind of rice dish, and that's more a half-rhyme anyway." "Well, maybe someday you'll be able to publish your poem about Count Olaf," Klaus said, "and everyone will know how horrible he is." "And I'll write a newspaper article all about him," Duncan volunteered. "I think I could build a printing press myself," Violet said. "Maybe when I come of age, I can use some of the Baudelaire fortune to buy the materials I would need." "Could we print books, too?" Klaus asked. Violet smiled. She knew her brother was thinking of a whole library they could print for themselves. Books, too, she said. The Baudelaire fortune, Duncan asked. Did your parents leave behind a fortune, too? Our parents owned the famous Quagmire sapphires, which were unharmed in the fire. When we come of age, those precious jewels will belong to us. We can start our printing business together. That's a wonderful idea, Violet cried. We can call it Quagmire Baudelaire Incorporated.
We can call it Quagmire Baudelaire Incorporated!
The children were so surprised to hear the sneering voice of Vice Principal Nero that they dropped their salt shakers on the ground. Instantly, the tiny crabs in the orphan shack picked them up and scurried away with them before Nero could notice. I'm sorry to interrupt you in the middle of your important business meeting, he said, although the youngsters could see that the Vice Principal wasn't sorry one bit. The new gym teacher has arrived, and he was interested in meeting our orphan population before our concert began. Apparently, orphans have excellent bone structure or something. Isn't that what you said, Coach Genghis? Ha ha! Oh, yes, said a tall, skinny man who stepped forward to reveal himself to the children. The man was wearing sweatpants and a sweatshirt, such as any gym teacher might wear. On his feet were some expensive-looking running shoes with very high tops, and around his neck was a shiny silver whistle. Wrapped around the top of his head was a length of cloth secured in place with a shiny red jewel. Such things are called turbans and worn by some people for religious reasons. But Violet, Klaus, and Sunny took one look at this man and knew that he was wearing a turban for an entirely different reason. Oh yes, the man said again. All orphans have perfect legs for running, and I couldn't wait to see what specimens were waiting for me here in the shack. Children, Nero said, get up off your hay and say hello to Coach Genghis. Hello, Coach Genghis, Duncan said. Hello, Coach Genghis, Isadora said. The Quagmire triplets each shook Coach Genghis's bony head, and they turned and gave the Baudelaires a confused look. They were clearly surprised to see the three children still sitting on the hay and staring up at Coach Genghis's rather than obeying Nero's orders. But had I been there in the orphan's shack, I most certainly would not have been surprised, and I would have bet what happened to Beatrice, my prized triptych, that had you been there, you would not have been surprised either, because you have probably guessed, as the Baudelaires guessed, why the man who was calling himself Coach Genghis was wearing a turban. A turban covers people's hair, which can alter their appearance quite a bit, and if the turban is arranged so that it hangs down rather low, as this one did, the folds of cloth can even cover the eyebrows. Or in this case, one eyebrow of the person wearing it, but it cannot cover someone's shiny eyes. Of the greedy and sinister look that somebody might have in their eyes when the person looks down at three relatively helpless children. What the man who called himself Coach Genghis had said about all orphans have perfect legs for running was utter nonsense. Of course, but as the Baudelaires looked up at their new gym teacher, they wished that it weren't nonsense. As the man who called himself Coach Genghis looked back at them with his shiny eyes, the Baudelaire orphans wished more than anything that their legs would carry them far, far away from the man who was really Count Olaf. You know, that is where we're going to end for today. This man gives persistence a whole new meaning. Teachers, I'm going to let you have the students talk about that. Persistence. What does it mean? And how can it be used in a positive and negative way? Because that's what Count Olaf is. He is determined and persistent in his pursuit of the Baudelaire orphans for their fortune. Now, without further ado, I gotta get ready for my therapy session. I love you all. I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.